This episode contains discussions about infant death, child abuse, intimate partner violence, murder, and other explicit comments that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hello, listeners, and welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm your host, JR. With me today are two Chicago school students, Alahna McCarron and Miranda Lucore. We have as our guest today Dr. Marissa A. Harrison from Penn State University, Harrisburg, PA. Just a little bit about Dr. Harrison. She's a research psychologist who investigates serial murder and is interested in serial murder from the evolutionary and other psychological perspectives. Her research has been covered in popular written and televised media, Time Magazine, The Washington Post, CBS All Access, Good Morning America, A&E. She's been featured on radio and television programming such as Investigation Discovery, A Crime to Remember, BBC Radio Britain, The Jill Bennett Show, and on popular Irish radio programs. Her recent book, published in 2023 by Cambridge University Press, called Just as Deadly, The Psychology of Female Serial Killers, has received expert and reader praise. Dr. Harrison's book can be found on Amazon Books. We don't have a structure here. It's more of a chat, where Miranda and Alahna have some questions for you. I'll have a few to throw in, and then you just talk about it. Do you want to give us a little background about yourself there, Marissa?
Sure. My name is Marissa Harrison. I am professor of psychology at Penn State Harrisburg. I have been conducting homicide-related research for about 12 or 13 years, focusing exclusively on serial murder for about 10 or 11. My background, actually, I'm a biopsychologist, and my specialty is evolutionary psychology. I don't know if you've taken a class on evolutionary psych, maybe you have, or if you discussed it in your other courses. Evolutionary psych is a lens through which you could view all of psychology. So what happened was my friend, who's a clinical psychologist, was studying mass murder, and I invited myself. I said, "Oh, that's so interesting. Can I come be on your team for a little bit?" He said, "Sure." So Tom Bowers and I wrote a paper about mass murder from an evolutionary perspective. And then one day, a wonderful student, just like you guys are, her name was Erin, said to me, "Hey, Dr. Harrison, do you want to do independent study in serial murder?" I'm like, "Okay." Well, researching serial murder, I said, "Sure." And then we realized female serial killers were very understudied, right? There's not a lot of empirical evidence out there on them. So we decided to go for it. And that's how my going down this avenue started. And I could say this, again, I'm a biopsychologist, I'm not a clinician. So what I do is I usually, when I conduct research, bring a clinical psychologist or some kind of very experienced forensic analyst on board for my, to get a second opinion and whatnot. So that's where I am. And I got my PhD in 2006 from University at Albany, State University of New York. And I've been a college professor for 25 years. For 25 years, when you're only 30, and I say, "Oh, it's just magic."
Yeah, I myself, I'm only 42.
It's me too.
As they say in the South, I just been rode hard and put away wet.
Oh, no. Okay. I've
No,
heard that.
okay.
Some of my best friends lived in New Orleans, and I've heard worse.
Miranda, Alahna, whenever you want to interject some questions for Dr. Harrison, just fire away.
So throughout your time in the field, what has been your favorite aspect of your studies or anything you've stumbled upon while studying?
Sure, absolutely. And that's a really great question. So I think the most interesting to me is the fact that female serial killers are so underexamined to the point where the FBI once said there are no female serial killers. So here is yet another area of the world where women are underestimated. I mean, and this is a bad thing. It's like, okay, so men do some really violent stuff. Women do it too. And that's why I wrote my book and called it Just as Deadly. So there are far more male serial killers in the world. The FBI estimates maybe 5 out of 6 are men. But there are female serial killers out there, and they do horrendous things, and they leave a trail of destruction. And I always say their victims are no less dead, right? So I just say just as deadly, because you might have somebody like, and you've probably heard of these individuals, like Jolly Jane Toppin or Belle Gunness. These individuals are estimated to have killed 100 people each, at least. All right. So you take Ted Bundy and Ed Gein and Ed Kemper and add up their victims, maybe Ted Bundy, probably more, but these women probably killed more. I take it back about Ted Bundy. He probably killed hundreds of people that we don't know about. But somebody like Ed Gein or Ed Kemper or Dennis Rader or John Wayne Gacy, all of them together didn't kill as many people as these two women did. So you asked what's the most surprising to me. I think it's the fact that female serial killers are so under-examined.
And why do you think there's not much research regarding the female serial killers? Got an idea on that? I mean, has that come up in your research or anything?
I do. I absolutely have some ideas, but I'm a teacher, so I want to know what you guys think first. Why do you think people just aren't ready to believe that women can be serial killers?
Personally, I think it's because a lot of people view women as mothers
Yes.
and don't think that they are able to commit such heinous acts against other people.
I agree. How about you, Miranda? What do you think?
I think very similarly. I think women are seen as more nurturing and more, they stay at home, they take care of people, they're the nurturing, loving kind. And I think people just weren't looking into it and thinking that they were capable of such things.
You are absolutely on target with what I believe. So that's what I wrote about in Just as Deadly. And I'm not the first person to say this, but we have cognitive frameworks called schema for basically everything we encounter. And your schema is your mental framework. You put it together based on everything you've encountered previously. So what's your schema for dog? You have one. For cat, you have one. What's your schema for woman? It doesn't include somebody who poisons babies, right? It just doesn't. Like you said, women are thought of as caregiving and nurturing. So the famous author Patricia Pearson, we all believe, I think women are underestimated because killer doesn't fit in female schema. And I know we're not the first people to say that, but I do strongly believe that we're just not ready to accept that women can do this kind of thing. And I've gotten to do some law enforcement training in my travels. And what I say to the police and the detectives and the agents is, you all are trained in criminal justice. You know really how to approach, how to catch the bad guys and girls. And I understand that you're going to be a lot better than I am at that. But as a psychologist, let me give you this ammunition, right? Lose your schema, lose your bias. If you don't think a woman can do these things, think again. Because, for example, think of serial killer nurse Kristen Gilbert, who was valedictorian of her class and killed, I think, at least 7 disabled elderly veterans or disabled veterans in a nursing home, or Retta Mays, who was a nursing assistant. She herself was a veteran and she killed elderly disabled men in a VA home. You wouldn't think the nurse and the caregiver or the woman could do these things, and they're the ones who did it. And I know that others have speculated that those 2 women, for example, got away with it for so long because people didn't think that women would, they didn't think to look at these nurses, these caregivers. So I think we need to lose our biases and realize that just about anybody is capable of these heinous crimes.
So during your research, have you figured out why female serial killers use suffocation or poison rather than bludgeoning someone to death?
Sure. Well, I figured it out. I wouldn't take credit for that, but I could tell you some reasons why I think that is. And primary motives for female serial killers are usually profit and power. And if I want to collect somebody's money, their insurance money, take money out of their bank account, whatever, I'm not going to be all, shooting people and leaving bodies around. I'm going to do it secretly and try to get away with it. I can't tell you too many cases of modern female serial killers, but go back to, maybe the 1950s and previously in the United States, we didn't really have that great a toxicology detection program, right? So the research methods and the analytical methods we have now are, they weren't as sophisticated back then. So it was easier to get away with killing somebody with arsenic or, putting taro rat poison in their coffee and whatnot. It was just easier to get away with covert. So I always say that, well, I don't always say it, since I wrote Just as Deadly, and when I was putting together the synthesis, I'm like, really, serial killer males kill overtly and they leave a string of victims and you're like, okay, who did this? But really with female serial killers, it's not until somebody detects a pattern, like, oh wow, all the babies on this specific shift died, or wow, all the elderly veterans in this wing of the hospital died, and statistically it's unlikely, and somebody starts having to dig into that. So I say overt versus covert. It's more of a means to an end versus for male serial killers, the kill in and of itself might be part of the ritual, right? So women just want somebody out of the way. I'm sure they're doing it to be mean because you don't really poison or suffocate somebody unless you don't really care about their welfare. But I think it's more, it's almost collateral. Like, I'm going to get you out of the way and I'm going to take your stuff and I'm going to feel good about myself. So I get some power from it.
Based on what you're saying there, is Aileen Wuornos, is she kind of outside that kind of statistical norm of what you found in your research with female serial killers? Because she was, not poisoned or anything. She actually, stabbed her victims and everything. So she was more like I don't want to say male serial killer, but she done things that male serial killers typically do.
You're absolutely right. So where I automatically go with that is, and isn't it interesting that she's probably the most well-known? That in my perspective, I think Aileen is probably the most well-known female serial killer, probably because they made a movie about her about 25 years ago, one of those things. But you're right. She shoot, stab, whatever, very close proximity. She was a sex worker and she picked up people and decided that day whether or not she was going to kill somebody, and she dumped their bodies in the woods. The one thing she had in common, though, was profit. She took their money. She stole from the victims. You're absolutely, she falls outside. Aileen Wuornos is an interesting case. And then, Miranda, you asked if there was something that surprised me, or you asked, is there something I think really interesting? So I had to conduct a lot of research, as you know, in my career, and then I had to put it all together for my book, Just as Deadly. And then I learned from that process too, right? And I found myself feeling sorry for some of the serial killers. Now I feel worse for the victims, of course, but when you really get into each one and you look at the paths they took, if I told you their story outside of all of the crimes they committed, you might say, wow, I wish that person got help. So Aileen Wuornos, case in point, she was clearly mentally ill. She had schizophrenia. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I think that if not diagnosed with schizophrenia, if she were alive and clinically assessed today, I'm going to guess she would be diagnosed with schizophrenia. She was a psychopath, etc., but she had a lot wrong. In her childhood, she was raped. She was abused. The allegations were incestuously by her grandfather. She was pregnant. A lot of people think that that's what it says in reports, that the baby was her grandfather's baby. Her father was in prison for child molestation, and then he died by suicide. Her mother threw her out of the house. Aileen accidentally set herself on fire. She had a sexual relationship with a brother, and she was a good student. And the school called her grandparents, who were her guardians, and said, we need to get her counseling. Can we do that? And they wouldn't give permission. So what if the grandmother just said yes? Maybe Aileen would have gotten some help. We don't know that for sure. But like, if I tell you somebody was raped and pregnant by their grandfather and set themselves on fire, and their mother abandoned them and their father died by suicide, you'd feel bad for that person, right? But Aileen did all these heinous things. We don't have to forgive, we don't have to excuse, but we could see the paths she went down. When I wrote my book, after doing really a great big summary of what I've done myself and what I feel, was outstanding in the field, I think we need more clinical and counseling psychologists, social workers, absolutely. And I think we need more police resources. I worked on a case. I don't think I could talk about it, but I could tell you that they told me they didn't have enough resources to process the forensic samples. I'm like, what do you mean? CSI. They're analyzing samples to rock music and it gets back to you on Monday. They said, it doesn't work like that. You have to pay thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. It's not free. And we don't have that. So it doesn't work like you see on TV. I mean, Jerry, you would know that more than I, but that's what my friends in the police had told me. It's like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. I'm not really on the inside of that world, but that's what they told me. It's like, okay, forensic samples are not readily analyzed. It takes a while and it takes vast resources.
That is true. That is very true. Upwards of like $5,000 per, I guess, samples that you send in, depending on what you want. It can range from $2,500 up to $10,000, but most common is around $2,500 to $5,000 for a sample to get it done.
And you think, why? We're trying to solve crime. This woman, the case they worked on, she murdered people, and they had the forensic samples, and they were sure they were going to find a specific poison in the systems of the victims, but no, they couldn't afford the analysis. I'm like, what happened
to her? The suspect
got a true bill against her. She was indicted, and she died by suicide before they could arrest her. And I said to my friends that work there, I said, how do you feel about that? And they said, well, we just wanted justice for the victims. I said, well, you got it. You knew who it was and you stopped her. As for somebody down by suicide, it's terrible, right? The detectives were doing the jobs getting her off the street. I think they wanted her to face the courtroom and face the families of her victims, and that didn't happen, but they caught her, put it that way.
For one of our shows, Alahna was communicating with a individual killer that killed his family in Germany, West Germany, back in 1987. And some of the things that you brought up about Aileen, he alleges in his correspondence with us that he has faced some of those similar things in his childhood, a lot of abuse, a lot of sexual abuse, seeing a lot of violent behavior against women growing up in Clinton, North Carolina. So some of that is kind of similar with what Aileen experienced. And I wonder if what you experience as a child can affect when you do your killings. I wonder if that can affect the way you kill. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. And I just wanted, if I may ask, Alahna, did you just write to him and he wrote back?
I sent him an email and then we exchanged addresses and he would handwrite me letters until I got his email. And then we would email back and forth.
He probably wanted to be heard. I'm not excusing what he did, but he probably appreciated the outlet. So Jerry, you asked what I think happens. Again, I could tell you my perspective, right? I can't guarantee this is the solution, but I think this is where my being a biopsychologist might come in handy. So I do know that the literature does say that if you experience childhood abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, they call it adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And if you experience 4 or more, and I don't mean 4 times, I mean four just incidents or more, and that's the child abuse, sexual abuse, et cetera, you're more likely to develop disordered cognitions and behavior when you're older. Usually I collected data from a bunch of people and wrote means and summaries and conducted some statistics. So I looked at really group behavior. But for Just as Deadly, I wanted to write extensive case studies, right? So I went in and I read, I think I have like 27 different case studies in the book. I read deeply the history of each person. And I'm going to tell you, almost always, the person was victimized when they were a child. And I mean sexually victimized. And I know people say it's a myth, and I'm telling you it's not, right? When you are victimized, and here's what I put together in my own head from research. When you are victimized as a child, and this is, a sensitive topic, but let's say somebody overpowers a child and they violate them, right? So if somebody overpowers a child can't fight back, right? So what do? You dissociate. You turn off your emotions. And so what if there comes a point where, as a child, that's imprinted upon you and you just can't turn your emotions back on again? And then psychopathy forms. You're a psychopath. You don't even feel emotions anymore because that was adaptive. And I can tell you that if you're an abused child, your nervous system forms differently. It really does. Your nervous system develops to expect an alarm. Everything is an alarm. So I get called for TV and podcasts and stuff pretty frequently. I'm not saying I'm a superstar. People just are interested in the material. And I have producers from a television show that did air. They wanted to talk to me about a woman who wasn't a serial killer, but she had been a part of 2 murders. And I could tell the producers of this program had an angle, right? They weren't going to be open to what happened to this woman. They were just, she's bad. Okay, I know what she did was bad. But they said, her parents used to victimize each other, so intimate partner violence. And they used to abuse her, and they abused her brother, and her brother raped her, and this happened her whole childhood. And they said, she's a terrible person. One time she was in a bar, and somebody grabbed her by the shoulder, and she smashed her beer bottle and stabbed the lady. And I said, and that's horrific. But let me ask you something. I said, let's say if your whole life you were abused, and you were punched, and you were raped, and that was your childhood, and that's how you grew up. How would you react if I grabbed your arm unexpectedly? Wouldn't you be like this? I would. And they said to me, oh, she'd like you. And I said, give her my email. Maybe she needs somebody to listen to her. I'm not saying I'm on her side. I don't like what she did. I feel worse for the victims, believe me. But maybe if somebody listened to her, she wouldn't have gone down that path. So I absolutely, going back to what you said, I absolutely believe that when somebody has a history of emotional or physical or sexual violence, it changes their trajectory. It changes who they are. And that's why I wish we had more psychological resources available, because if this trauma does happen to somebody, we can help them address it, or maybe we could prevent people who would actually perpetrate, people from perpetrating these crimes. So yeah, I think childhood has a lot to do with it. I'm wondering what you think. You've all studied this. What do you guys think about that issue? Do you think childhood contributes?
I think it contributes a lot. It's your brain's forming during that period of time. It's a very influential period of time. You're learning about the world, you're seeing how it forms. So if you grow up learning that the world is violent and not a nice place, why would you change your mind in the future?
You're exactly right. Alana, what do you think?
I definitely agree. I work with behaviored kids right now at a school, and seeing how they have completely different perspectives on life than I do, and hearing how they've grown up and how we're their only outlet it's hard to hear, but I can definitely see where a lot of things stem from childhood. Something happens, it's not just once and then a serial killer's born. It's repetitive. And
I agree. And let's, we add the disclaimer that really some people have behavioral issues without any external stimulation, right? So that you might have a hormonal or a neural or whatever. So it's not everybody's parents' fault. We're not saying that at all. And we're certainly not saying that mental illness is a direct pathway to criminal behavior. That's not true whatsoever. In fact, somebody who is mentally ill is far more likely to be victimized themselves. But we would be remiss if we didn't say that some people with mental illness under certain circumstances are more prone to violent behavior. And we have to say that. You can't be wishy-washy about it. That is factual, right? So when we address that, then we can look for it, then maybe we can prevent it, maybe we can help people. And then let's also say that somebody could be horribly victimized in every arena, emotional, sexual, physical, and never hurt anybody when they're older. And I'm sure that's far more common. And there really aren't that many serial killers out there, right? So you're very, 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 very unlikely to become a serial killer. But that's what I see pretty common in the histories of the people that have committed these murders. And then male and female serial killers commit murders for different reasons, right? So we also have to acknowledge sex differences. It's not an equality issue. There's really a qualitative difference there. Men and women, the people, are victimized, but they very, very often do it for different reasons.
Do you think these adverse childhood experiences affect women at the same rate they affect men?
I do. Well, at the same rate. So in other words, they're victims. I don't know. That's a really, really good question. In the same way, not necessarily. So I know I saw the literature and I don't know if I could cite it to you, but I
think
good. Women that experience that are far more likely to commit certain types of crimes, including sexual crimes, but please don't quote me on that. You want to do your lit search. I just remember reading that. I don't know if male or female children are victimized differentially and qualitatively different. I don't know that for sure. And then if we knew that, then we could, apply that to helping people even more so. What were you thinking along those lines, Miranda? I'm just curious. I want to follow it through there.
There's more men serial killers that have been studied and looked at and recorded, so I wasn't sure if they are affected more by these experiences, which is why there's more of them, or it's just the nature of gender differences.
So it's interesting what you're saying, and I don't know if I could speak to frequency, but what we can kind of reverse engineer it in that men are almost always likely, male serial killers, to have a sexual motive, right? And I don't have the absolute numbers, but in our research, I just want to make sure I get this number for you. So when we studied male versus female serial killers, at least 75% of male serial killers had a sexual motive, compared to only about 7% of female serial killers. And, I didn't interview anybody. I had to go by like archival records. My guess would be the sexual crimes would be a lot higher for men compared to 75, but I had to go with the data with what I saw. So male serial killers, exponentially more likely to commit sex crimes. And if you're murdering somebody due to sexual urges, where did those aberrant urges start, right? So what I read clinically, and I'm not a clinical psychologist again, is it might start off with violent fantasies, maybe some aberrant fetishism. Fetish in and of itself, that's somebody's prerogative, but when violating somebody else, it's a different story. So it escalates over time to, violence against women, rape, and then murder. Why does somebody have those thoughts that violent sexuality is the way to achieve gratification, right? And so you'd want to go back and check that out. And again, I'm not blaming everybody's childhood, but I wonder where that trajectory started.
Do you think more men are recorded and have been known to kill because their urges are overt, but women are more covert? They use poison more. Do you think the CSI aspect, the forensic aspect, because we don't have those resources, can hide a lot of these women who do murder.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I believe what you did. You're absolutely right. The data, 1 out of 6 serial killers are female serial killers, are based on known serial killers. What if there's the type of women who just doesn't get caught, right? Because, like you said, if the methods are covert, right? That's what happens. Sometimes you're like, wow, this person, this woman, 4 of her husbands died. We better, go back and do some autopsies to see what happened. But then again, that's resources and whatnot. And then back in the day, people kind of didn't talk about that. There was a female serial killer by the name of Nanny Doss. Have you heard of her? The giggling granny? She
Yeah.
killed 4. I've got to go back and look, but she killed multiple husbands. She was in the 1950s and she moved from state to state. So people probably didn't, put 2 and 2 together. But then her mother ended up dead and her grandchild ended up dead. And people were like, wait a minute, and then she poisoned her husband's dog. She burned down her house for the insurance money. So people were like, okay, let's go back and look. And then they conducted some autopsies, and upon medical examination, they found arsenic in her husband's systems. And she said stuff like, oh, well, he got in the way, or the one husband was, he wouldn't buy me the TV I wanted. So there's clearly mental illness there.
I have a question about the
Yes.
2 female serial killers we talked about earlier in the Veterans Administration, Rita and Christian. Do you think that they seen themselves, though, as ending the suffering of these elderly gentlemen?
Power, right? So no, I don't see them
Okay.
as an angel of death. Kristen Gilbert killed one veteran. He was in his 40s. He was a blind, disabled veteran. I think he had multiple sclerosis as well. She asked the head nurse, if he dies, can I leave early? Well, yeah, but he's okay. The guy died, so she wanted to go on a date. She killed him. It was getting him out of the way. And Retta Mays, so she was a nurse's assistant. She injected insulin, gave people heart attacks. She didn't get any kind of financial gain from that. But they asked her why. She said at one point she felt like her life was under control, and maybe that was a way to gain control. So power control. I could tell you one thing I would change about my research if I could. When I first started, I documented primary motive, or what we gauge to be primary motive. And if I can go back, I don't think there's just one reason. I would look at multiple motives. And so when we look at, for example, female serial killer nurses, they're not going to get paid anymore. So what is the motive? It's got to be power and control. And no, Jerry, I don't think it's ending suffering. If anything, they created exponentially more suffering by killing people that, giving them heart attacks, killing them and leaving their loved ones in distress forever, knowing that their beloved was murdered.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I see it. And power is one of those reasons why, according to your research, that female serial killers kill. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Well, let me, if I may expand on a thought there, up to about 40% of female serial killers are nurses or nurses' aides. So somebody that goes into the field to help people, right? And again, profit aside, they're going to get their salary no matter what. What must be the motive? And no, I don't see it as ending suffering, although I'm sure that happens. The women I've studied, though, no, it was to get somebody out of the way, or to create an emergency and go in and play the hero, that type of thing. Have you ever heard of Jolly Jane Toppin? Jane Toppin from Massachusetts from the turn of last century, the 1900s?
I have.
You have, right? So she said I think she pled guilty to dozens, but she told authorities that she killed at least 100 people. So she was a nurse. She was an excellent nurse. In fact, she left a hospital to go be a private nurse and made a lot of money. And she was fascinated with autopsies. She would laugh about them. Her colleagues thought she was peculiar. She said that she would inject patients with sedatives and stimulants so she can watch them go in and out of consciousness. And she wanted to hold them as they died. And she said, well, something to the effects of, well, I wanted to feel what it was like to feel somebody's life slip out of their body. Right. So tell me that's not a power motive. Clearly, there's some mental illness there. She was diagnosed back in the day. I don't think schizophrenia was a diagnosis yet, but psychiatrists at the time, they were called alienists, and they said they used the term quote unquote mental degenerate, and she was confined to a psychiatric home for the rest of her life. And she started trouble there too. So she was a very, very sick person, but she was brilliant, right? Because she was a top nurse. So
Yeah, I know she was found guilty by reason of insanity.
And that's interesting. And I could tell you, this is where, so again, I'm not forensically trained, I'm not legally trained, but I know that there is, a strong belief in mens rea, and did the person know right and wrong versus are they insane? Okay, well, they knew right from wrong. You shouldn't take a life, but it doesn't mean that they don't have profound mental illness. We wouldn't do those things. Have you ever heard of Gary Heidnik from Philadelphia? He's one of the killers. He's not a serial killer, but he's one of the murderers that the serial killer in Silence of the Lambs is based on. And Gary Heidnik kidnapped sex workers and shackled them in his basement, right? So think about that. He electrocuted one of them. They engaged in cannibalism. I mean, there was all kinds of horrible stuff going on. He had delusions, hallucinations, etc., etc. But he had one of the women sign a confession that she took part in the murders. So clearly he knew right from wrong, right? Because he's ascribing blame to somebody else. Well, I better not take all the blame or any blame for this. I better put it on somebody else. So he knew the actions were wrong. But does that mean he was sane? He shackled people in his basement and electrocuted, and they engaged in cannibalism. That they don't think like he's not thinking like we do, right? And I think he was executed. I mean, he was sentenced to death. And I don't have an opinion on that one way or another, but I mean, he's not thinking like a normally functioning human being.
Did you find in your research that any of your female serial killers took sexual advantage of their victims before killing them, or did they participate in any post-death sexual rituals on the bodies or anything that you see typically with the male serial killers? Or did they, do any cannibalism or did you notice if they took any trophies like some of the male serial killers?
Okay, so yes, a couple different things there. I think I maybe saw rumors that one female serial killer might have been sexually motivated. I know Jolly Jane Toppin, there was some talk of maybe her being a little bit sexual, but that's not in the court reports or anything. It's really just a rumor. But I could tell you, I've never studied any female serial killer, solo acting female serial killer that I saw that pattern in. I've never seen it. Men, yes, they kill primarily for sex. You asked about cannibalism. I've not seen that or like vampiricism, that kind of stuff. I never saw anything like that in the serial killers that I studied. Then you asked about trophies. That's a different story. Okay, so I actually am working on a paper right now, so you're getting a scoop, where we collected data. And, I didn't think women would take trophies as much as men did for a couple different reasons. And I don't like the word trophies, but that's what they say. So when male serial killers keep souvenirs from the victim, it's reported often as fetish, being a fetish, and they could, gratify themselves and replay the fantasy over and over. In fact, a greater between murder interval is seen in people who take fetish objects because I guess they're replaying the fantasy and whatnot. And also, I have a hunter-gatherer model of serial murder that I'll tell you about if you want. But let me finish my thought about female serial killers. You just don't really see that. But I did see them keep some souvenirs. Now, you have to think, if profit and power are their motives, well, if somebody has a nice, like I saw somebody keep somebody's lipstick, I didn't, I don't know the operation of her mind. It didn't occur to me it was some kind of fetish. I think she liked the lipstick. Like, oh, I'm a girl. It's a nice color. I'm gonna keep this one. So I don't think it has the same function. But in my research in one of my papers, I put forth the hunter-gatherer model of serial murder. Now, I'm not saying we evolved to be serial killers, we wouldn't be here. But think of like ancestral whisperers, right? So in the course of human evolution, we lived in hunter-gatherer societies. Typically, it's thought that there was a sex division of labor where men hunted, women gathered. People always say, "You're a woman. How could you say that?" Like, why can't I go with the evidence? It doesn't. What are you talking about? I'm a woman. I don't care if men hunt, women gather berries. That's not my business. Anyway, I've gotten people come down to me for talking about rigid sex differences. I'm like, but if we don't acknowledge anthropological evidence, then what good is any science? But anyway, I digress. Okay, so hunter-gatherer model, and so. You've heard, I'm sure, of male serial killers being referred to as hunters, right? And so what our data showed was that they're more likely to travel outside of their birthplace to kill, travel between states to kill, stalk, right? So these and they do keep trophies. These are the behaviors of a hunter. For gathering, you got to go a little bit more figurative. Oh, and men kill strangers, right? Tend to kill strangers as victims. Women tend to kill the people they know, the people around them, and they keep profits. So in that aspect, figuratively speaking, I mean, we could think of it as gathering. I'm not saying that's the be all end all. That's the model that makes people do what they do. but I do think evolutionary strategies could contribute to the way people think. And so, but let me just give a caveat on that. Certainly, I believe evolutionary psychology plays a factor in whether or not somebody becomes a serial murderer. But then, of course, you're going to have clinical issues and traumagenic issues and head injury and hormonal issues and gender issues and historical pressures. So, I don't know if we will ever know for sure why somebody would do these things, but I know we can't put it on one thing. It's just, it can't be, right? Because then let's say it was just for giggles, let's say, well, it's because of schizophrenia. Well, then everybody with schizophrenia would do the same thing. It just, that doesn't work like that.
No, it doesn't. And a lot of the research that began with the FBI back in the 70s and stuff, and were focused mainly on white males. And we also know that from their research that they didn't look at minority serial killers, male or female. And the most prolific serial killer in the United States, male-wise, is Samuel Little, and he was African American, and he admitted to killing approximately 95 women, marginalized women, and that's why you don't hear much about him.
Oh, absolutely. And he drew them. He knew what they looked like. He sat there
Yes.
and drew them. And I hear you on that. And that wasn't that long ago. What, maybe 10 years ago, maybe something like that. That they caught him, but he
Right.
left his victims across the United States. I could tell you that scholars such as Matt DeLisi believe that Ted Bundy probably killed about that many people, because there was a period where it's not really documented what he did, right? They kind of didn't know what he was doing. And then later on, his killings were so sophisticated. I believe Professor DeLisi argues that there had to be some trial and error period during that time. People, and he would play games like, oh, I'll never tell you, maybe I'll never tell you, like power games. So I think he probably came close to that count. I think Matt DeLisi is right on that. We'll never know. It's speculation, but
Is there a certain age women seem to kill more?
the age that the perpetrator is or the victim target?
Either or.
Okay, so average age of when they begin their crimes, we found was in their 30s, but that's a wide range, but 30s was the average. We couldn't really assess the exact age of victims because sometimes they find remains that you just can't even age and whatnot. But almost 50% of male and female serial killers kill only adult victims. Okay. Female serial killers are much more likely than male serial killers to kill only child victims. Okay. What I have in my data was that male serial killers are more likely than female serial killers to kill both adults and children. But I think where I was looking at from the women are much more likely than men to kill child victims, I think you're going to get maybe in a nursing situation or some aberrant form of, well, it's all aberrant, but factitious disorder imposed on another, or they used to call it Munchausen's by proxy. So killing your infant or making the infant sick for attention. And you get somebody like convicted murderer Mary Beth Tinning, who forgive me the number, I think it's 8 of her kids ended up dead. And she had some nursing background as well, from what I read. And she would just present that to each. She lived in Schenectady, New York. And I remember that because I used to teach there, Schenectady County Community College, which was a great school, by the way. But anyway, she would present at the various hospitals in Schenectady, and they didn't really have a centralized system then. Oh, my baby is dead, or my baby stopped breathing, to the point where they wanted to study her family and think, oh my gosh, there's some kind of death gene in her family. But what investigators found, and even journalists found, was that at each funeral, she almost looked like she was having a good time. She was enjoying the attention. So, I don't think she was formally diagnosed. All right. But I would get, and again, I'm not a clinician, I just would speculate that if she were assessed by a clinical psychologist, she probably would be found to have had what they call factitious disorder imposed on another. That's just my opinion based on all the symptoms, but I can't formally diagnose her.
So with male serial killers, I feel like we notice it a lot more, but the McDonald triad, the fire setting, bedwetting, and
Yeah.
do you think, or during your research, did you see any of that in the female serial killers' childhoods?
Okay, so not in childhood, no. I also want to say that I think, again, so I'm not a clinician, as we know, and I keep saying that I should get a t-shirt, but to my knowledge, the triad is a standing model, but if you go back and research, each one of those things could predict adult cruelty, each one of those things. So it's not necessary to have the triad, the bedwetting, the fire starting, and cruelty, right? Maybe I'll block that out. So, but if each one of those could predict. You asked if I saw that in the childhoods of female serial killers. I have not. And I don't remember if I formally examined, but I don't see that there to even, start the investigation. But what I did see was arson in some female serial killers. For example, Kristen Gilbert. I don't know if they ever pinned it on her, so I guess we can't really accuse, but fires mysteriously would start in the wing of the hospital that she worked in. And Jolly Jane Toppin, she would start fires. It could be some kind of, like with Jolly Jane, maybe it's some kind of psychopathy, just not a lot gives you stimulation on your day-to-day life, so you got to create some kind of really, really terrible event to actually feel something.
Research that I've read, highly indicators for a serial killer was abuse of domesticated animals. When I look at that, that must be a difference in female serial killers, because I didn't hear you say that you noted that any of them in their background had abused domesticated animals in any way.
I didn't see it whatsoever. And that's so, I mean, everything we talk about is disturbing, and that's just so disturbing, right? But I didn't see that in female serial killers. They abuse human babies, right?
Yeah.
Not all, your own children or children you're in charge of, nursing, a skilled nursing facility or whatnot, or intensive care. It's almost the same, right? You have dominion over the animal trusts you to take care of your pet, and somebody abuses them, or you have dominion over the baby needs you to help take care of it, and you use that power for, cruelty. Guys, a question? I'm just curious. Do you believe in evil? Can people do evil things?
Yes. I think sometimes evil happens to them first, but they still make that decision in the end to do harm unto other people.
It's true. Miranda, what do you think?
I think that people aren't naturally evil. I think that things happen to them that make them do evil things. But I don't think anybody's born innately evil.
Interesting. So, Jerry, you've seen a lot in your work. What do you think?
Well, I don't know if I can say that someone is evil in the sense of that's just the way they were born, but I do think that you can do evil things as a human being to other human beings and be labeled as evil.
I agree with what you said. So not as a moral label, because I'm just curious, because I've had people ask me or say this to me, not as a moral label, but labeling the action. Absolutely. I believe so. You kill Janine Jones is thought to have killed dozens of babies.
I was reading early 1900s, a lot of midwives who were relied upon to help deliver babies. Some of them were serial killers, they found out later, and they kill hundreds of babies. And it was the late 1800s, early 1900s, when, let's face it, forensics and stuff just wasn't there. And who would believe? I mean, you would have to, again, everything wasn't like instantaneous like we can do now with a phone or Google. So people would have to start suspecting, hey, every time this lady is a midwife, over her history, she's had 50, 60 baby deaths. That's just statistically unlikely. You don't put that together. Nobody's kind of checking.
Think about infant mortality too.
Exactly, back then.
When really, a baby died, it's horrible, but it wouldn't be as uncommon as it is today.
We thank Dr. Harrison for being on the show today. Don't forget to read her latest book, Just as Deadly, The Psychology of Female Serial Killers, published in 2003. You can find it on Amazon. Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who participated in this episode. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at crimpodcast@thechicagoschool.edu. That's CRIMPODCAST at the Chicago CHICAGO school SCHOOL.edu. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to give a special shout out to her because if it wasn't for her, this episode and all episodes would not be possible. So thank you so much, Amy. I'm J.R. Rainbolt, your host, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Be safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers or the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers or the Chicago School.